That night, not a single bird sang in the forest. The wind touched the branches of the silver-barked trees, but the leaves seemed afraid to make a sound. And Silverstream, which flowed through the valley, was not singing as it usually did. Its water had grown heavy. It moved like a dark shadow among the stones, leaving pale foam wherever it washed ashore. And two elf children did not yet know that this was not just a small problem happening to a stream. It was near the end of the Third Age of Middle-earth. East of the Blue Mountains lay a long, hidden valley surrounded by dense forests. The name of this valley was Lindoril. Those who saw Lindoril Valley from afar would think they were looking at a green blanket spread over the earth. Tall trees with silver bark grew inside the forest. When spring came, small blue flowers bloomed on their branches, and at night, these flowers glowed softly as if they had absorbed the moonlight. Through the heart of the valley flowed Silverstream. Silverstream was born beneath the mountains to the north, glided between the rocks, passed by the elves' tree houses, and stretched all the way to the southern villages. Deer drank from its water. Red-breasted birds built their nests on its banks. Little silver fish hid in the cool hollows between the stones. Elves, humans, and forest animals all lived on the water of the same source. The names of the two elf children living in this valley were Liniel and Taren. Liniel wore her long, dark hair in a thin braid down her back. She never rushed when walking in the forest. She would notice right away a bent stem, a broken branch, or a small stone that had moved out of place. Taren, on the other hand, was a restless, curious, and quick boy. He climbed the low branches of trees, jumped over stream stones, and followed every sound he heard. Liniel thought first, then took a step. Taren, most of the time, stepped first and remembered to think a little later. Still, the two of them completed each other very well. That morning, as the sun rose behind the mountains, they came to Silverstream holding two empty pitchers. Taren was walking ahead as usual. "I'm going to fill mine before you today," he said, reaching his pitcher toward the water. Liniel suddenly grabbed his wrist. "Wait." Taren looked at her in surprise. "What happened?" Liniel didn't answer. She knelt down and examined the water carefully. Thin black lines were drifting across the surface of the stream. The foam along the bank had turned gray. A heavy smell rose from the water, like burnt wood mixed with wet iron. Taren's smile faded. "It wasn't like this yesterday." Liniel brought her finger close to the water but didn't touch it. "The fish are gone too?" Indeed, not a single flash of silver could be seen in the water. A little further along, one of the water flowers had fallen over into the mud. The moss on the bank had darkened, as if it had been scorched under a hot stone. Right at that moment, a young roe deer came out from the bushes. The animal approached the stream. It lowered its head toward the water, but sensing the bad smell, pulled back in fear. Taren opened the small canteen at his side. He poured clean water into his palm and filled a wooden bowl he placed on the ground. The deer stepped forward a few paces, drank the water, and quietly returned to the forest. Taren watched the animal for a while. "If the stream stays like this, what will they all drink?" Liniel picked up her pitcher. "We must tell the village right away." Soon activity stirred throughout the elf village. The elder elves told everyone not to drink any water from Silverstream. Clean water from the storage tanks was divided into small containers and distributed to families. But there was not an endless supply of water in the tanks. Moreover, it was not just the elves' water getting dirty, but the water of the entire valley. As the leaders of the village prepared to send an investigation team up the stream, Liniel remembered an old dwarf who had come to the valley a few days ago. The dwarf's name was Borin Stoneear. Borin was a stonemason who traveled mountain paths. He was short, broad-shouldered, and had thick eyebrows. He braided his copper-colored beard in 3 places and carried an old leather bag on his back. Coming to the village square with the elves, Borin smelled the small bottle filled with the dirty water. Then he raised the bottle toward the light. Black particles were swirling inside it. "This is no ordinary mud," he said. "It's burnt coal dust and bitter water coming from a quarry." The oldest elf of the village asked with concern, "Could it have reached all the way to the source?" Borin's face turned serious. "We must go up to see." As a group of adult elves prepared, Borin looked up at the sky. The sun had risen high. "It is safe to travel by day," he said, "but the tracks may have appeared at night. There are old caves on the north side of the mountain. The creatures that settled there might be working while hiding from the sun." Liniel and Taren said they wanted to go too. At first, no one allowed it, but Liniel described the tracks she had seen along the bank of the stream, and Taren showed which direction the bad smell was coming from. In the end, the village leaders made a decision. Borin, Liniel, and Taren would not go alone. 3 adult elf guards would accompany them as far as the northern border of the forest. While the guards investigated whether there was any other danger nearby, Borin would examine the old waterways. That way, the children would not be sent on an adventure all by themselves. They set off around noon. During the first hours, the forest was still full of life. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, and birds fluttered among the branches. But as they moved further north, a change began. First, the bird song quieted down. Then the flowers along the stream became sparse. A little further ahead, half of the leaves on an old silver-barked tree had turned yellow. Liniel walked over to the tree and placed her hand on its bark. The bark was not cool, as it usually was. The soil near the tree's roots was sticky and black. Liniel turned her head. "Taren, look here." Right below the bank, 3 small fish were trapped in a shallow puddle, trying to find clean water. Without hesitation, Taren knelt down. Using the wooden bowl Borin had given him, he picked up the fish one by one and carried them to a small, clean side pond that was not connected to the stream. When the last fish was released into the water, it quickly hid beneath the stones. Taren looked at the mud on his hands. This time, he said nothing. He no longer just heard what it meant for a stream to be polluted. He was seeing it with his own eyes. After a while, they found large footprints on the ground. The footprints were nearly 3 times the size of a human foot. On the soil were broken branches, crushed grass, and pieces of black coal. Borin bent down and examined the prints. Troll. Taren immediately looked around. "But the sun is out." "That's why we can't see them now," said Borin. "Stone trolls cannot come out into daylight. They must return to their cave before dawn." One of the guards pointed to a tree trunk chopped down with an axe. The cut was fresh. Borin placed his hand on the trunk. They worked at night. Wheel tracks stretched toward the mountain slope. Following the tracks, they came upon a wide, wounded opening cleared right in the middle of the forest. Dozens of trees were knocked down. The trunks of some had been taken away, while their branches were left on the ground. Among the trampled grass, birds' nests were crushed and small stone dens were scattered. As the wind blew through the clearing, there was no rustle of leaves, because there were no trees left to make a sound. Taren spoke softly. "Yesterday this was a forest." Liniel saw a small, broken eggshell on the ground. She bent down and placed it gently onto the leaves. Right then, Borin noticed a dark opening on the mountain slope. The mouth of a cave was shaded with chopped tree trunks and large stones. This way, no sunlight could enter inside. In front of the cave were old dwarf rails, half pulled apart. Borin touched one of the rails. "The trolls didn't make these." "Who did?" asked Liniel. "My ancestors," said Borin. "A very long time ago, there was a small quarry here. Then, when a dangerous vein was found inside, the quarry was closed. Taren peered into the cave. Red firestone? Borin turns to him in surprise. Where did you hear that name? Taren pointed to a broken stone tablet he had found on the ground. On the tablet were symbols similar to some of the markings on Borin's bag. Borin carefully cleaned the tablet. It talks about the firestone here, but this stone was marked not to make weapons, but to stay away from. So, do the trolls know this? Asked Liniel. Borin looked at the crude contraption in front of the cave. No. They found the old dwarf carts and furnaces. They don't understand how they work. They only saw that when they pull the lever, the cart moves, and when they throw wood into the fire, the stone glows hot. So the trolls had not built a complex mining system. They were simply operating the old machinery they found using brute force. The head guard looked at the direction of the sun. We must inform the village before night falls. Borin nodded. The trolls will come out when the sun sets. We cannot go inside without knowing how many there are. Right at that moment, a sound like scraping stones came from deep within the cave. Then, a deep grunt was heard. Is the sun setting? Another voice answered. Not yet. A third troll shouted angrily. Then don't put out that fire. The red stone comes out tonight. Liniel and Taren looked at each other. Borin's face grew tense. The trolls are about to reach the firestone. What happens if they reach it? Asked Taren. Borin looked at the cracks above the cave. The stone itself does not burn, but the rock around it is very hot. If they break it with brute force, they could breach the water pockets under the mountain. Liniel understood right away. The source of Silverstream is under the mountain too. Yes. If the hot rock mixes into the water, the source will not only become polluted, its path could change. In some places, it might dry up completely. The head guard made his decision. 2 guards would return to the village immediately to bring help. The 3rd guard would take the children and Borin to a safe place. But Borin pointed to the small stone markers near the old dwarf rails. First, we must find the water route. If they start digging tonight, the source could be ruined before help arrives. The guard was about to object, but Borin continued. We won't go inside the cave. The old control gate must be on the hill outside. So 2 guards set off back to the village. Only then did Liniel release her little messenger bird. A short note about the location and number of the trolls was tied to the bird's leg. This time, why and when help was summoned was clear. Those remaining followed the old stone markers rising along the mountain slope. Taren headed down the wrong path a few times, but Liniel noticed the faded arrows on the rocks. Most of the markers were hidden beneath moss. After a while, they reached a large stone door. On the door were 3 wave symbols. Borin pushed the door with his shoulder. The stone opened slowly. Inside, 3 stone levers stretched along the wall. The sound of water came from beneath the ground. Borin read the writings above the levers. The first lever redirects the main source to the old backup channel. The second lever keeps water away from the mine tunnels. And the third lever opens the floodgate. Taren frowned. Aren't we going to shut off the source? No, said Borin. Cutting off the water completely would leave the living creatures in the valley without water. We will redirect it to the old backup stream bed for a short time. Liniel examined the map on the wall. The backup channel looped around the east side of the mountain and reconnected with Silverstream a few miles later. So the water will keep flowing? Yes. Less water will arrive, but it will stay clean. Borin slowly pulled the first lever. A deep rumble echoed from inside the mountain. The stones beneath their feet trembled. Then the sound of the water changed direction. The flow in Silverstream's polluted bed began to diminish. Clean water was now directed into the old underground channel. Borin locked the lever in place with a stone latch. This mechanism will hold for 1 night at most. Tomorrow before sunset, we must return the water to its original bed. Now they had a firm deadline. As the sun sank toward the west, they all retreated to the safe side of the forest. The sky turned from orange to purple, and from purple to dark blue. When the last light vanished behind the mountains, the stones in front of the cave moved. The first troll stepped out. He was huge. Dried mud covered his gray skin. On his shoulder, he carried an axe with a handle as thick as a tree trunk. Then two more trolls came out. One of them pulled carts, while the other tossed large logs into the furnace. The trolls did not understand the old dwarf mechanisms around them. They operated stuck rails by kicking them, and jammed levers by pounding them with stones. The largest troll called out from the mouth of the cave. "Tonight, we take out the red stone." The other troll asked, "What do we do after that?" "We take the stone. We smash the stone door to the south. There is gold inside." The trolls had no grand war plans. They were simply greedy. They believed there was treasure behind an old dwarf door and thought the firestone would break it open. But the mistake they were making could harm the entire valley. Borin whispered, "First, we must stop the furnace. As the heat rises, the rock will crack more easily." Taren looked at the old rail system. The coal carts reached the furnace by crossing a narrow bridge. "Let's not break the bridge," he said. "It could block the stream." Borin looked at him and smiled softly. Taren had remembered his earlier lesson. Liniel pointed to the metal latch beside the rails. "The lock holding the carts is right here." Borin nodded. "If we reach the latch, the carts won't be able to leave the cave." Their plan was simple. Liniel would go to the latch, Borin would jam the old rail lever, and Taren would act as a lookout. The third guard would pull the children back if the trolls approached. Liniel moved silently through the dark. The fire lit by the trolls painted the fallen tree trunks orange. The air smelled of coal, oil, and burnt bark. Liniel reached the latch, but the latch was rusty. She pulled with both hands. It wouldn't budge. Taren was watching the trolls from atop a tall rock. One of the trolls raised his head. "I heard something." Taren found a small stone on the ground and tossed it far away. The stone hit an empty barrel. Clack! The troll walked angrily in that direction. "Mouse!" Liniel pulled again. The latch creaked, but it didn't open. Borin crawled up beside her. He pulled a small bottle of oil from his bag and poured a few drops onto the rusty spot. "Now!" Together they pulled. The latch popped open all at once. The thick iron lock in front of the rails fell into place. The first coal cart coming from the cave crashed to a stop. The cart behind it slammed into it. Wood and coal piled up on the tracks. The trolls turned and shouted, "Who did this?" Liniel and Borin immediately pulled back, but one of the trolls spotted them. "Elves!" All three trolls chased after them at once. As Taren ran between the trees, he pulled a rope he had prepared earlier. The rope released empty barrels that had been tipped over, not dry branches. The barrels rolled down the slope. One of the trolls leaped to the side. Another tried to jump over a barrel and tumbled into the mud. But the biggest troll didn't stop. Liniel and Taren headed for the narrow passage behind the cave. Borin called out from behind, "To the old stone door!" The tunnel behind the cave was an old dwarf escape route. It was wide enough for the children to pass, but too narrow for trolls. Liniel and Taren went inside. Borin and the guard followed right behind them. The largest troll slammed against the tunnel entrance. The stones shook. "Come out!" Borin saw a round wheel on the tunnel wall. "This door might still work." Together they turned the wheel. At first, nothing happened. The troll struck the wall once more. Small stones fell from the ceiling. Taren gritted his teeth and pulled on the wheel with all his strength. Suddenly, a loud noise rumbled from within. The stone door began to descend. The biggest troll thrust his hand between, but couldn't withstand the door's weight. He was forced to pull back. When the door closed, the trolls were trapped on the outer side of the cave. But the trouble wasn't over. A cracking sound echoed from the depths of the cave. The trolls had already weakened the area around the firestone far too much. Borin leaned his head against the wall. The hot water is rising. Liniel remembered the second lever at the control gate. The lever that keeps water away from the mine tunnels. Borin looked at her. That's right. If we don't pull it, hot water will flood this cave. Together, they began running back up to the hill outside. Meanwhile, the trolls were searching for another exit on the other side of the stone door. The forest was dark. The moon peeked through the clouds from time to time. Liniel followed the markers on the rocks while Taren listened to the sounds behind them. When they reached the control gate, Borin pulled the second lever. The lever came halfway and jammed. Borin tried again. It didn't move. Taren noticed a small piece of stone caught underneath the lever. Right here! He pulled the stone out. All three pulled on the lever together. The moment the lever snapped into place, a powerful rushing of water echoed from inside the mountain. The hot water moved away from the mine tunnels and was redirected into a deep, empty stone basin. The cracking of the cave stopped. But the trolls had reached the hill too. All three stepped out from the darkness. The largest troll raised his axe. Open the source back up! Borin stepped in front of the children. Right then, an arrow flew from the forest and lodged into the handle of the troll's axe. Then a second arrow landed on the ground right before the troll's feet. Elf guards appeared among the trees. Help from the village had arrived. But the guards did not attack to defeat the trolls. The eastern sky was beginning to brighten softly. Dawn was near. The captain of the guards called out in a loud voice, "If you return to the cave, you will be trapped behind the stone door. If you leave the valley, you can reach the northern pass before sunrise." The trolls looked up at the sky. The darkness was fading fast. The biggest troll roared in anger. But they had no choices left. If they returned to the cave, the dwarf doors would lock them inside. If they stayed outside, they would turn into stone when the sun rose. The trolls dropped their axes and sacks. Then they began running toward the narrow, shaded pass to the north. The guards followed them from a distance. Reaching the dark hollows behind the mountains, the trolls left Lindero Valley. They never returned again. As the first rays of sunlight fell over the valley, Liniel, Taren, and Borin returned to Silverstream. But winning the day did not mean their work was finished. The chopped trees lay on the ground. The stream bed was still dark. The animals were still looking for clean water. Borin reminded them that the backup water channel would hold only until sunset. So everyone set to work. First, the dirty channels dug by the trolls were closed. Piles of coal were moved into stone compartments where water could not reach. The fires inside the furnaces were put out completely. The elves cleaned the polluted soil along the stream bank. People coming from human villages brought young saplings and water-filtering reeds. Taren went to the small pond where he had saved the little fish earlier. He checked their water. The fish were alive. Liniel cleaned away the dark dirt around the roots of the old, yellowing tree. Then she brought clean water and poured it gently over the roots. The tree did not heal all at once. The leaves did not turn green right away. But a single, healthy leaf at the tip of a branch fluttered softly in the morning breeze. Liniel smiled. Nature's wounds took time to heal. When noon arrived, Borin returned to the control gate. He slowly raised the first lever back into its original position. The main source of Silverstream was opened once more. First, a thin trickle of water trickled out between the stones. Then the flow grew stronger. Clean water began moving forward along its old bed. Silverstream began to make sound again. First, a gentle trickling was heard. Then, as the water passed over rounded stones, it rediscovered its old song. The roe deer stepped out of the forest. This time it came right up to the water. It bowed its head and drank. After a while, the birds returned too. They landed on the bank and washed their wings in the clean water. Taren sat down by the edge of the stream. They caused so much harm in just one night. Borin looked at the fallen trees. Yes. So, how long will it take for this place to be like before? Some things recover in a few weeks. Others require years. Taren knelt beside a young sapling and smoothed the dirt around it with his hands. This time, Borin gave no long lecture, nor was there any need. Taren had already seen the answer. A few strokes of an axe were enough to bring down a tree, but for it to reach toward the sky again took rain, sun, clean soil, and many long years. When evening came, Liniel and Taren stood side by side on the stream bank. Inside the water, they spotted a tiny flash of silver. One of the fish they had saved had returned to the main stream. Then another appeared, and another. Liniel smiled. Do you think Silver Stream will remember us? Taren thought for a moment. Maybe not us, but it will remember what we did. From that day on, Liniel and Taren were called the young guardians of Lindoril. Every morning they checked the stream. They straightened the stones around the saplings. Whenever they saw anything out of place left on the bank, they picked it up. They showed the younger elf children where the fish hid, which trail the roe deer took to reach the water, and why a clean source mattered to the whole valley. They did not explain this with long speeches. They brought the children to the side of Silver Stream. They let them listen to the sound of the water. They showed them the old trees whose roots held the soil together. Together, they watched the birds returning to the shore, the flowers blooming once more, and the fish glowing between the stones. Because sometimes, the best way to understand why we must protect something is to see how many living things it gives life to. Even years later, when the waters of Silver Stream sparkled like silver under the night moonlight, the children of the valley remembered that story, the danger brought by 3 trolls in the dark, the old stone paths of a wise dwarf, and 2 elf children who, though afraid, did not back down to protect the place they lived in. From that day on, everyone in Lindoril Valley knew the exact same thing. A stream was not made of water alone. Flowing inside it were the home of the fish, the strength of the trees, the hope of the animals, and the tomorrow of the entire valley. We have reached the end of another fairy tale. You can subscribe to our channel to listen to many more wonderful stories. See you again in another fairy tale. For now, goodbye.